Cylinders are a bit tricky to deal with when it comes to SubD modeling. Adding any sort of vertical control loops will immediately cause creasing and as a result will interrupt the curvature of the surface. Working with cylinders requires a bit of forethought and strategy and sometimes requires compromise. So in this video, we'll take a look at how we can tackle cylinders with the help of a few examples. Alright, so let's just go ahead and pop the cylinder into our viewport and we'll tab into edit mode here. And we're just going to scale this in a bit like that. And we'll select a couple of faces here and extrude this. And in doing so, what's going to happen is we are going to end up with 5-spoke poles wherever we basically extruded. So all over here, we have 5-spoke poles. And so when we try and subdivide this, it's just going to cause some odd pinching. So let's just go ahead and add some control loops to see what that is like. So just go ahead and add a couple of loops here in between. Make sure to select all of them and then bevel them. Add one more loop here just to hold those together. And another one here. And now if we were to add that subdivision surface modifier, you'll see that we have some terrible pinching here that is just not acceptable. So in order to sort of fix this, what we need to do is ensure that we have more loops running vertically. So we just cannot add control loops like this, because if we do so, it's just going to interrupt the curvature of that surface. So we'll see that we've got this crease here, and you'll see how the highlight is just stretching and squashing. We just do not want something like this. We don't want to interrupt that curvature. So in order to remedy this, like I mentioned, we need more loops running here. So I'll just go ahead and delete that. And a good candidate for this would be the cylinder with 32 edges. So I'll just go ahead, select both of these, just extrude them inward like this. And another time, go ahead and select a couple of edges like this. Of faces like this. And we'll just extrude this, just like we did with the previous example. Now, I'll go ahead and add some control loops again, like we did with the previous example. Bevel them. Add a loop here just to hold that together. And loop here. Select the remainder, and we're just going to bevel this to hold that edge there. So now when we subdivide this, we're going to get a much better result. However, if we zoom in, you'll still be able to see that slight pinching. So you can see how that highlight is kind of getting interrupted by that pinch that is there. So this, in my opinion, is totally fine if we're looking at it from a distance. But in the event of an extreme close-up shot, this might not work. So for most things, this is totally fine. The 32 edge cylinder is a perfect candidate. But if you want something that prevents that pinching even better, then we can just double up the number of loops that we have. And so I've got an example for that. Let's just drag this off to the side and bring this up. All right. So here I have more loops than I had before. And I've not shifted any poles because that would just interrupt the flow. So here you can see that this loop is in close proximity with this edge, and therefore it's behaving like a control loop. And so what that does is it tries and holds that corner there and that edge there. So it's trying to preserve that. This is basically behaving like a control loop. And I've gone ahead and just added control loops just like we did with the previous example. And with this, you can see that pinch is all but eliminated. So if you zoom in really closely, you can still see some amount of it. But again, when it comes to SubD modeling, it's all about compromise. So you're not going to get the perfect result. And so we need to know when and where we need to make compromises. And especially when it comes to cylinders like this, we need to know how to basically work with what we have. And so let's just apply the same principle to a different example now. So I'll just go ahead and hide these meshes, and we'll pull out another cylinder here and just divide this. So I'm going to create an extrusion now. And what I'm going to do is inset first so that we shift those poles when we create that extrusion. And you'll notice that I'm bringing this edge close to the edge that we have here so that it behaves like a control loop. So what I'm doing is insetting pretty close to that edge so that it behaves like a control loop. And then I'll extrude this. And then I'll go ahead and add a loop here and just bring it up to there. And we'll need another loop here in order to hold this. And if you're being very particular, we can also select these faces here and inset it once just to push that 3-spoke pole away from that corner, and then subdivide it, or just get rid of these caps. And you can see we have a fairly good result. So from a distance, this looks totally fine. But if we were to zoom in, you can see that we have some level of pinching and interruption to that curvature. So if we have an extreme close-up shot again, we can basically go with something like this, where I have 64 edges on the cylinder and it's holding up much better than the previous cylinder. But this is a good candidate for an extreme close-up shot. So if you know that this model is going to be used for an extreme close-up shot, this would be a good candidate. And this one, for all other situations, would be perfectly fine. So you'll have to pick and choose depending on the context. Now, let's go ahead and look at one final example. Again, we'll create a cylinder here with 32 edges, tab into edit mode. And this time we're going to create an extrusion on basically very close to this cap, or in fact, the cap is in contact with the region that we're going to extrude. And in doing so, we're going to get a 5-spoked pole here. And, you know, with 5-spoke poles, we're just going to get some pinching in that region, and the result is going to be unpredictable. And so we'll have to solve for that. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is just undo that. We'll just get rid of the cap at the bottom. We don't need that. And we'll just pull this in like so. And just another time for good measure. And we will basically select that region where we want to create that extrusion. And I'll just inset ever so slightly like that. Or actually, we'll need to bring that closer so that that behaves like a control loop. And then we can just select that region that we have there. And we can extrude that. Add our respective control loops. Like so. We'll just have to straighten up some of these edges here so we don't get any pinching. Same thing here. And just shift that up like this. And now when we add that subdivision surface modifier, we're getting a much better result than we would get if we were to model this with, say, a 16 or an 8 edge cylinder. However, we need to pull this 5-spoke pole in. So that's going to be the next thing we're going to do for this. So let's just go ahead and select all the loops here. Let's just inset that slightly. Readjust this loop so that they don't collide with each other. And now that we've shifted that 5-spoke pole in, you'll notice that we get a much better result here. So let's just take a look at it without the inset once, and then with the inset. So this is what we're getting here. We're getting this very weird looking corner. So in order to get a better finishing, I'll just inset that. Just make sure we select the right faces and do that again. And now we have a nice crisp edge there. So there's no weird pinching, no uneven edges and things like that. And so this looks pretty good. So in most situations, this would hold up. But if you want to have more control over the details here, then maybe you'll want something with more loops in it. So here we have 64 edges, and this is a much crisper result. However, this is a good candidate only for extreme close-ups and things like that. So it really comes down to the situation in which the model is being used. For most cases, the 32 edge cylinder is a perfect candidate, whereas the 64 is good if you really want your details to be more crisp under close scrutiny. So in conclusion, when it comes to cylinders, the trick is to create a cylinder with the appropriate number of edges depending on the context. Adding loops after the fact will always result in harsh-looking creases that interrupt the curvature of the surface. That brings us to the end of this video. Be sure to check out the other videos that are part of this series, and I will talk to you in the next one. Thanks for watching.